chapter 2 of Tehillim. So the brief synopsis that it says on the top of the chapter says like this. This psalm warns against trying to outwit the ways of God. It also instructs one who has reason to rejoice to tremble, lest his sins cause his joy to be overturned. It's a powerful full punch, that line. And we're going to go slowly through this chapter. Actually, first, we're going to go through it quickly. Let's go through it word by word, verse by verse, translate it, and then we're going to go back to the beginning and try it again. Chapter 2, pasuk number 1, Lama ragshu goyim uleumim yagurik. Why is this gathering of these nations? And they're going to come together, and what are they going to do? Yagurik, going to say nothing. They say empty words. Not nothing, sorry. They say something, but it is empty words. Yisyatzvu malchei eretz, the kings of the land, they rise up. V'roiznim, and the ministers, naistu yachad, they sit and they schmooze together. They give ideas to each other. Al Hashem v'al Mashiachai. But what's the problem? They're talking about Hashem and His anointed one. Ninatka esret meisrei seimai, they say, let us snap, let us take off the strings that hold us, the cords that hold us, and these ropes that hold us, the yokes that hold us, let us take them off from on top of ourselves. Yoshev b'shamayim Yitzchak, though, the one that sits in heaven, Yitzchak, he laughs. Hashem, yilag lamai. Hashem, he will be the one that will mock at the end. Oz yedaber eleimai biapai, and then he speaks to them biapai in his anger, ubacharoinoi yivahaleimai, and with his wrath. He says, what does he say? Vani nasachti malki. I was the one who anointed this king. Al Tzion Har Kodshi, not only to be king, but also over Tzion, which is Yerushalayim, Har Kodshi, as well as the Har, the mountain, the holy mountain, the Harabais. Asapra el Choik Hashem, Amar Elai Bniata. Now this is turning back. This is David HaMelech saying what Hashem says. Now David HaMelech continues, and he says, Asapra el Choik Hashem, Amar Elai, that I'll tell you about a very specific choik, a very specific statute that Hashem instituted. Amar Elai, he told King David, Bniata, you're like my son. Ani ayoim yiliditicha, it is as if I have given birth to you today, which we're going to discuss at length soon. Sha'al mimeni vetna, Hashem tells David HaMelech, and David HaMelech is repeating, request from me and I will give. Goyim nachlasecha, I would also give land and your inheritance, the nachala that belongs to you. V'achuzascha, afsei aretz, and the possessions from the ends of the earth. Terayim b'shevet barzel, so you'll smash them with a rod, a sword, made out of iron. Kechli yoitzer tenapsem, and they will bust, just like a potter's pottery vessel. So now kings, right? Going back to the beginning, we're talking about these kings that are sitting around. These kings that are sitting around and saying empty words. So he says, kings, haskilu, have a little bit of seichel, haskilu, from the word seichel. Think about what you're doing. Think about what you're saying. Hivasru shaifte aretz, and be disciplined. People that run, people that think, at least, that they rule the earth. Ivdu es Hashem be'yira, serve Hashem with awe. V'gilu bir'ada, and rejoice while trembling. This pasuk, we can have a full class, or a full series of classes just on this one pasuk. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. Final pasuk, nashku var, please yearn for purity, penyenaf, you don't want the anger to be awakened, v'soivdu derech, and you'll lose your way. Derech is interesting that he brings the idea of a way, of losing your way over here, because also in the first chapter last week, we talked about ki yodeh Hashem derech, Hashem knows the way, so don't make Hashem angry, you'll lose the way. Ki yivar kemaptapa, you'll get angry. Ashrei kol chaysei bai, praised are those who chaysei, who put their trust in Hashem, and the fact that this kapitel, this chapter, finishes with Ashrei. At the end of the class, I'll give you a little bit of an insight of what it means to finish a kapitel with Ashrei, what it meant to David HaMelech, and that will come up as well. So that is the translation of the pasuk again of the chapter. The chapter is a conversation that David has, according to some, the conversation that David has with the Philistines. Most commentaries, most mefarshim, most rishonim say that this is a conversation that David HaMelech has with the Philistines. There's a little bit of a problem with saying that this is a conversation that he has with the Philistines, because he calls them kings, and the Philistines weren't really a monarchy, and they didn't have kings, and they were more of a rebel rouser type of group. So that's the problem they have with this, and therefore there's an argument. And Rashi, interestingly enough, Rashi comes here and says, and we'll get into it again afterwards. Rashi comes here and says, the first explanation that Rashi gives over here on the first pasuk, he says, in a way of drush, not pshat, which Rashi usually does, but he says in a way of drush. He says that our rabbis have darshaned that David HaMelech is not talking about himself, he's talking about the future. He's talking about a time when Mashiach will come. That is drush, the level of drush. And then Rashi continues and he says, but Lefi Mashmai, but according to the simple pshat, it's talking obviously about King David, and it's talking about the scenario after he conquered Zion, after he conquered Jerusalem. So then he had a fight with the Pelishtim. The Philistines came to fight with him. And that's when he says, guys, have seichel. Hashem gave this to me. This is not my story over here. Be careful. You don't want to unleash Hashem's wrath. So that is the two ways that Rashi over here comes and says it, which is very, very interesting. But most commentaries keep it according to the pshat and say that this is talking about the story of the Philistines. There are some others, if I'm not mistaken, the Rambam. I saw it on Shabbos when I was preparing the class on Shabbos. Today, when I was looking to write notes, couldn't find the comment. But they say that the Rambam, if I remember correctly, the Rambam says that it actually goes one to the other. That some psukim is talking about David HaMelech for himself, and some psukim, David is giving a prophecy of what will happen when Mashiach comes. And if you look at the psukim, you'll notice that some psukim are talking about in the current, in the here and the now, in the hoive, which is the Hebrew grammatical term for the now. And some psukim, you'll see, it's talking about the future. Oz, it will be at some point in the future. And what's that? That's when Mashiach comes. So that's also the way some will say that part of it is talking about David HaMelech. Obviously, David HaMelech wrote the whole thing. The question is, was he referring to himself, or was he referring with prophecy of what will be when Mashiach comes? Keep in mind of both of those explanations, because they're both, we interweave both of those explanations as we go through the chapter. It's something very nice and beautiful to see that coming alive throughout the chapter. And the Yavitz actually is the key that says it's talking about Mashiach. And even the Radak, who explains the whole thing, the whole pasuk and everything, he explains it until the end of Beis. He says that it's talking about David HaMelech, and then all of a sudden at the end he says, and a lengthy explanation. The Radak is a very lengthy explanation on the whole chapter. Doesn't say it in the beginning. At the end, he just makes a little comment and he says that there are mefarshim that say that this is talking about the war of Gog and Magog, talking about the final war before the coming of Mashiach, which is a debate if that's going to be an actual war or it's going to be a spiritual war. But regardless, he says it might be talking about Mashiach, and he leaves it at that. The whole time he's back and forth explaining how it refers to David, and at the end he just gives that little explanation that maybe it's talking about Mashiach. Rashi, as I mentioned, brings both, but interestingly enough, he brings the drush, he brings the idea that it's Mashiach, that it's talking about Mashiach first, and only afterwards he says, but according to the Pshat, it must mean that it's talking about David HaMelech with the Philistines. And as I mentioned, some that say that some verses David HaMelech is referring to himself, and some verses he's talking about a utopian future, which he's talking about when Mashiach comes. Okay, now that's the introduction, so to speak, to the chapter, and then we go into it. Pasuk number 1. Pasuk number 1 says, Lama ragshu goyim ul umim yagurik. Right after saying in the previous chapter that Rishayim won't succeed. What did we say? That the Russia will be like the chaff that when you throw it into the wind, it disappears. It travels with the wind. It doesn't have any real existence. That's what a Russia is going to be. Comes here this pasuk and says, and this is a continuation. Says, if that's what's going to happen to the Russia, lama rakshu goyim. Why are they still trying to meet up? Why are they still trying to start up? If they're not going to have any lasting effect, if they're not going to, why are they still assembling? Why? That's lama. And lumim yegurik, and ultimately, what are they saying? The words that they're saying is empty words. They get up there and they talk like tough individuals, but ultimately their words are empty words. That's what the pasuk is saying. Continuing from before, the Russia doesn't exist. The Russia is going to disappear. So why are you continuing down that path of the Russia? That's what David HaMelech is telling to these kings. We just mentioned that the Russia won't exist. So why are you starting up? Why are you still around? Why don't you mend your ways? The next pasuk says, Yisyatzvu. So keep in mind, I mentioned that some of the psukim, Lama Ragshu is talking about today. Why are you doing that now? Pasuk Beis, verse number 2, Yisyatzvu is something that's talking about the future. In the Hebrew grammatical text, it's something that's talking about the future. Yisyatzvu malchei eretz v'roiznim neistu yachad. That there are going to be something about kings getting together and ministers having this discussion. And neistu yachad, the commentaries, basically, the way I understand from the commentaries, is that it is talking about them sharing secrets and ideas on how to capture and how to capture back Jerusalem, according to the explanation about this, talking about the Pelishtim, right? But according to the other explanation, it's talking about Mashiach. It's that in the future there's going to be kings that will start up and won't let the Jewish people be successful when Mashiach comes. Obviously, they're not going to be successful because that's the continuation of the pasuk. But that's what they're trying to do. So that is pasuk Beis, that they stand up and they try to start up. Pasuk Gimel says, what are they trying to do? Ninatkas meisrei seim. So Ninatka means that they're saying, and this is literally in quotation marks of what they're saying, let us remove the cords. But it's more than that, because there's two things over here. Ninatkas meisrei seimai and nashlicha mimenu avei seimai. There's, first of all, that I want to take off the meisreis. Meisreis is a type of rope, okay? And then nashlicha, I also want to take off avei seimai, which aveisais is also a type of rope. Two different types of ropes. So why mention it? So many commentaries say that's how it's poetic, and therefore you're saying the same thing twice. And many commentaries that say it that way, if I'm not mistaken, Rashi as well. But I saw a beautiful explanation and says that it uses two different words. The first one is ninatka, which means to disconnect. What does it mean to disconnect? It means that there's the yoke of King David. King David won over the Philistines. So he has the yoke over these people. So we want to disconnect from that yoke, right? What's a yoke? A yoke is what you put on an animal to make sure that it plows the field, right? You put a yoke on the animal, a yoch, as we call it in Yiddish, right? You put a yoke on the animal. The animal can only go straight. The animal has to do what it needs to do. So when a king like King David won over the Philistines, he put a yoke over them, which also included taxes, etc., etc. But that as well. So they want to take off that yoke, even though they agreed to a treaty with King David. They want to take off that yoke. Now, Maiserais, the first thing is they want to snap the yoke. That's the first thing. Nenatka. You want to snap it. You want to break it. So we're talking about not Maiserais, the first type of rope. We're talking about a lesser, not as strong, a weaker rope, and that they're trying to snap. And then when he says avaisais, he's talking about a stronger type of rope, and that's what he says, v'nashlicha, I want to throw it off from over my shoulders. It's holding on to me. I can't break it, I can't rip it, I can't snap it. I want to throw it off of my shoulders. So in that way, it's not repeating itself. It's talking about two different types of yokes, two different types of rope, so to speak, and they're trying to take off this yoke from King David. There's also and this is where Hasidic philosophy takes it to another level. It says that they're not talking, the Yavitz, if I'm not mistaken, says this, the Al-Shich, the Al-Shich says this, and he says, we're not talking about the yoke that King David put on the non-Jews, on the Philistines. What we're talking about, they're saying is that what these Philistines want to do is take the yoke of Torah and mitzvahs off of the Jewish people. What we want, what King David is saying, what you're trying to say, that we want to convince the Jewish people to take off the yoke of their Father in heaven, to take off the yoke of Torah and mitzvahs. That's what he's trying to tell them to do, and you're not going to be successful with that. So it's a different pirish. It's a total different explanation. All of a sudden, we're not talking about the yoke that King David put on the Philistines. We're talking about the yoke that we got from our Father in heaven, that we got at Mount Sinai when we accepted the Torah. So that's another explanation for Pasuk Gimel and Nenatkas Misri Singam. But let's keep on with the Pashut Pshat, with the simple Pshat, right? So the Philistine kings are getting up there, and they're starting up with King David, and King David says, why are you saying that? Why are you saying that you want to take off the yoke? You think you're going to be successful with that? Yoshev b'shamayim Yitzchak. Hashem is sitting in the heavens. Yoshev b'shamayim. He's sitting in heaven and he's laughing. Yoshev b'shamayim Yitzchak. Hashem yilag lamai, and he mocks them. Meaning that ultimately, who's going to have the last laugh? Hashem will have the last laugh. Meaning, to put the psukim into context, you might ask, if the Rishayim, Lama Rakshu Goyim Lomim Yagurig, the evil kings, the Philistines, that are starting up with David, and they're making trouble. So why is Hashem letting them? What's going on over here? Why doesn't Hashem stop them right away? What does King David say? Hashem is sitting up there and laughing. Don't worry, he has your back. And Hashem yilag lama, Hashem will ultimately have the last laugh, etc. And it could also be that it's talking about the future, about Mashiach, that maybe now we don't have the last laugh, but ultimately when Mashiach comes, we'll have our Eretz Yisrael, we'll have our Beis Hamikdash, etc. So also this pasuk can be learned from both ways, whether it's David HaMelech talking about the Philistines, or David HaMelech talking about the future for when Mashiach comes. And what's going to be us when Hashem ultimately is going to talk to these people, when Hashem is going to have his say, so to speak. So then we have the next pasuk in pasuk number 5. Then he will speak to them. He'll speak to them with his anger, and they'll be terrified also from his wrath. So that is pasuk Hey, that when he gets significantly angry, if you're going to really drive Hashem crazy, so to speak, and you're going to start up with the Jewish people so much, ultimately Hashem is going to get more and more angry, and it will come as a surprise. It won't be something that you'll expect. That's what the pasuk says, right? From the word behala, that when something comes as a total surprise, not something that you're expecting, and then at that point, David HaMelech, or Mashiach, but David HaMelech talks now in the name of Hashem. So now he continues, Va'ani. So the beginning of the first few verses is talking about warnings from Hashem. Where does King David know these warnings? So there is, it's actually in the next pasuk where Rashi says that when it says, Hashem Amar Elai, Hashem tells me. What does it mean that Hashem told me? It's because he was told by the Nevi'im. Rashi brings down the Nevi'im from Nasan, Gad, and Shmuel, from these Nevi'im, from the prophets of the time. That's where he gets this information from. So he got this information. He's telling them, why are you starting up? You're not going to have any success. Va'ani nasachti malki al tzion harkachi, and Hashem says that I have anointed a king al tzion harkachi. I anointed him. So how could you defy him if I was the one that anointed him? It's not that he became a king on his own and David HaMelech decided to become a king on his own. It comes from Hashem. Hashem decided. And it's talking about, Radak says that it's talking about after the conquering of Yerushalayim. And that's why it says, not only did I anoint him, I also gave him Yerushalayim. I also gave him the Har HaBayis. I gave it to him. It's not something that he took. It's something that I wanted him to have. This is also, the Rebbe used to talk about this very often, that the reason that we have a connection to the land of Israel is not because of a UN declaration. It's nice when others agree and others understand that that Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael belongs to the Jewish people. That's beautiful. That's not why. Why? Because Hashem created the world and He said that Eretz Yisrael belongs to the Jewish people. It says it so clearly in the Torah. And this is what King David is saying over here. Hashem says, I anointed him. Don't start up with him. I gave him Tzion and Har Kodesh. I gave him Yerushalayim and the holy mountain Har Kodesh. So King David says, if that's the case, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell this to everybody. And this is the way pasuk number 7 starts. Zayin. King David says, Asapra al chayk Hashem. This chayk. So interesting, he uses this idea of chayk. He says, I will promote. I will tell everybody. I will recount. I'll tell everybody, whoever is ready to listen, I'll tell them this chayk. What does chayk translate to? Statute. We know that in Judaism we have many different mitzvahs. The level of mitzvah that is called chukim, chayk, are mitzvahs that we don't have an understanding in. We don't understand why Hashem told us to purify ourselves with a para aduma. Zayis chuk HaTorah, right? This is the chuk, the chayk of the Torah. We don't understand why. There's no rational reason. Sometimes we have mitzvahs that make sense to us. We won't come up with them on our own, but it makes sense why Hashem gave us that mitzvah. That's a different type of mitzvah. Or mitzvahs that we would have come up with on our own, like do not kill, do not steal. That's a different type of mitzvah. Chukim, chayk, statutes, are mitzvahs that don't have an explanation. And that's what King David says over here. Asapra al chayk. I will talk about this chayk, this statute. This is, this statute, yes, Parshas Chukas, exactly. I'm going to tell everybody about this chayk. Not that I decided. This is the humility some of the commentaries bring up about King David. This is the humility of King David, that I could have said, I won a war and that's why, or Hashem loves me and that's why. No, there's no reason. It's a chayk and that's why. And there's nothing I could do about it or not do about it. It's a chayk. And that's why Hashem wanted it and we don't necessarily understand it. And what does it say? I'm going to tell everybody this statute, this chayk of Hashem, that Hashem told me, Amar Elai b'niyata. Hashem told me that you are my son. So obviously, Hashem has no son. That's a different religion. That's the wrong religion. And obviously, it's not what it means over here, that Hashem has a son. We know, it says in the pasuk, Banim atem la'Hashem elokeichem, that we are like children to Hashem's eyes. It's interesting, especially when it comes to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we taven to Hashem Avinu and Malkeinu, right? But we will get to Malkeinu in a moment. But Avinu, when we daven to Hashem, we consider him to be like a father. And that's the concept over here, that he says, B'niyata, Hashem says, you are like my son. Not only like my son, you're like my son on the day of being born. I love you so much, like my son on the day of being born. You can have a son that doesn't give you so much nachas. On that day, he's not, you love him, but, he could do better. The day that a child is born, which is a whole nother conversation, which we could talk about in another form. Why do we get so excited when a child is born? Let him accomplish something, then we'll be happy. But that's a conversation for another time. Pa'al mamash, literally, when a child is born, we are thrilled. We are very excited. We're very happy. And that level of happiness, that's what King David says, that the chayk, this statute from Hashem, is that we are like children to Hashem. Literally, like on the day that a child is born. There's other commentaries say that the day that David HaMelech is referring to of being born is not necessarily the day that, like a figurative day of being born, but it's talking about the day that he was anointed. And then the Zohar also says that it's talking about the day of his bar mitzvah. Because that's the day that he really can start having a proper relationship with Hashem. So there's different commentaries of what Ani Hayom Yeliditicha is referring to, but ultimately this is an idea in pasuk 7. What he's saying is that I will tell everybody that and this is what I'm going to continue to promote, that Hashem calls us, and this is talking about King David, but by extension, every single Jew, the children of Hashem. Children, not literally the children, but the children of Hashem, meaning that Hashem treats us like children. Now, and this we're going to bring up more closer to the end of the Perek. We also, as I mentioned, when we daven on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we say Avinu, but we also say Malkeinu. Or in another frame, we say Im Kivanim, Im Kavadim. We refer to Hashem that if you're going to refer to us today like children, deal with us like a father treats his children, Im Kavadim, or like servants. So there's the two ways that we have that service of Hashem. The first thing he mentions over here is about being like children to Hashem. Sha'al mimani ve'etna goyim nachlasecha v'achazoscha avsiyot. It's pasuk number 8. And this pasuk is a fascinating pasuk. Hashem says, Sha'al, ask. And this is the connection between Lama ragshu goyim lo miyagurik. The Rebbe has a long sicha on this. The Rebbe said in 1971, a long sicha, 1970 actually, Parshas Noach, 1970, the Rebbe gave a long sicha about this idea, and he says that a person, a Jew, shouldn't be afraid. A Jew in the land of Israel shouldn't be afraid, because ultimately Hashem will take care. Lama ragshu goyim lo miyagurik. Ultimately, even if they try, the pasuk here in Tehillim says they're not going to be successful. But what do I want from you? And that's what we have in pasuk number 8. The Rebbe continues, She'al mimeni. Hashem wants us to daven to him. And chas v'shalom, sometimes Hashem even creates a scenario of negativity only because he wants to hear us. I'm not saying that in every scenario it's like that, but there is something like that brought down in Sfarim, brought down in the holy books, that there could be a scenario like that Hashem literally is waiting to hear from us. And sometimes he has to give us a little nudge in order to hear from us. And how do we avoid that? We can avoid that easily by davening regardless, even when times are good, right? Even when times are good, we should daven to Hashem. And so that's Sha'al mimeni, ask from me. Don't just, yes, you're going to get it and you don't have to worry, but at least do the ask. Make sure to ask. That's the first part of the pasuk. What's going to be? Va'etna, and I will give goyim nachlasecha, the nations that belong to you, as a nachala. Nachala literally translates over here as an inheritance. And that's what a nachala is. When you get an inheritance not in modern Hebrew, but in biblical Hebrew, nachla means an inheritance. And it talks about it in the Torah in that kind of term. So what are you going to get as an inheritance? And that's the way the Ibn Ezra explains over here, that you're going to get as an inheritance because it's Hashem's land. It belongs to you. Don't worry about it. It belongs to you. It's your Yerusha. It's your inheritance. You're not going to get it because of a successful war, but the war will be successful. But why will you get it? You'll get it because it belongs to you as a Yerusha. It belongs to you as a inheritance that belongs to you. Okay, that's pasuk number 8. Pasuk number 9. Terayim b'shevet barzel. So King David tells Hashem that you should smash them with a rod of iron. Some commentaries say that it's talking about a sword or a stick or something like that. Kichli yoitzer tenaptzeim, and they'll bust, so to speak. They'll just like a potter, a pottery in the hands of a potter when he decides that he wants to destroy it. Pasuk number 10. Va'atam malachim askilu. So after this whole introduction, King David says, kings, guys, haskilu, have some seichel, as we mentioned before. Think about it, right? Think about what you're doing. Hivasru shayftei aretz. You can't cancel Hashem's plan. There's a guarantee. There's something that's going to happen over here. So be wise. Don't be so foolish. And it doesn't matter whether you're a king, melachim, or hivasru, if you're some sort of ruler. Don't be so defiant. Don't speak so defiantly. Don't think that things are going to go your way. Because look, it's not going to go your way. So be careful. Don't say empty words. So this is going back to the beginning of the pasuk. After this whole warning, he says, Yaskilu, have some seichel. Think about it. Can't cancel Hashem's plan. So pasuk number 11 comes and it says, and what should we do? Ivdu es Hashem b'yira v'gilu b'irada. Serve Hashem with yira. Yira in Hebrew translates, loosely translated, and it's not the proper translation, is fear. Serve Hashem with fear. We don't serve Hashem with fear. We don't serve Hashem. Chas v'shalom, we shouldn't serve Hashem. Maybe some people do, but we shouldn't serve Hashem because we're afraid that lightning will strike. That's not why we serve Hashem. We serve Hashem yira over here, and in general, when it comes to the service of Hashem, yira means not fear, it means awe. How awesome is Hashem? You should think how awesome is Hashem, not because, so there is a level that you want to serve Hashem out of love. I love God and therefore I want to serve Him. Not what we're talking about over here. We're talking about when you contemplate how awesome Hashem is. When you think about how awesome a big ruler is, or someone that has a big, a mighty person, a strong person, when you think about it, it creates a certain level of awe inside of you. Maybe it would create fear, but that's not what it should be. Especially when it comes to Hashem. We don't have to be afraid of Hashem. We have to be in awe of Hashem. And that's the idea over here. Ivdu es Hashem b'yira, serve Hashem in awe. Like be in awe of Hashem. Think about the awesomeness of Hashem. When you daven, that's the way you're supposed to daven. Think about the awesomeness of Hashem. And the next two words are two opposites. V'gilu. What does gilu mean? Think about the psukim, that the brachas that we say for a chassan and kala under the chuppah. We say gila, rina, ditza, v'ched, but they're all different types of rejoicing, all different types of happiness. So the pasuk says v'gilu, and you should rejoice, you should be happy. Berada, and you should tremble. That's what rada means. Rayid means to shake. So what's the story over here? What's this pasuk trying to say? So we have, again, the pasuk says that we should serve Hashem with awe, and then v'gilu, we should be happy, we should be joyful, we should rejoice. Re'ada, we should tremble. So the simple pshat is that if you're going to serve Hashem with awe, and you're going to serve Hashem with joy, right? Awe and joy we could put together. Who's going to tremble? Others are going to tremble. That's the way most commentaries say. V'gilu, you'll rejoice, but when others are trembling. Who's the others? The ones who are defying Hashem, the ones who are going against Hashem. Comes Hasidic philosophy and says, as much as we need to serve Hashem with joy, as we know, it's a mitzvah, ivdu es Hashem besimcha, you have to serve Hashem with joy. You're not, when you get up to do a mitzvah, you have to do it with excitement. You have to do it with happiness. You have to be excited to do a mitzvah. It's ivdu es Hashem besimcha. You have to smile. You have to be happy. You have to dance when you do a mitzvah. You have the opportunity to connect with Hashem. What greater thing in the world? That's what you have to do. Comes Hasidic philosophy and says, the problem is that when people get too joyful, what happens? Someone says too much l'chaim. If someone gets railroaded, so to speak, in his happiness, so then it could bring to hailulus. It could bring to undesired effects. So a person, of course, should be happy and should always be happy, and especially in their service of Hashem. But they should temper their happiness with also re'ada, with trembling. And trembling is really connected with the awesomeness. So when you're happy, you should also be thinking about how awesome Hashem is. So yes, while I'm so happy, I should also be trembling in front of Hashem. Happiness and trembling at the same time. Where do we have that? Under the chuppah. The happiest moment for a chassan and kala. What do? We break the glass. Why? Because there shouldn't be a situation, the Gemara is famous Gemara about this, but there shouldn't be a situation where it's just happiness. We have to remember the sad times. Because if it's just happiness, we lose track of where we're really at, what's really going on. And therefore, every situation of happiness, the rabbis instituted that it should also be tempered with a little bit of sadness or trembling, as is mentioned in this case. Comes Hasidic philosophy and takes it a step further and says, we have to serve Hashem, and we have to serve Hashem with joy. Why are we happy to serve Hashem? Why are we happy to serve Hashem? Are we happy that we have the opportunity to serve Hashem? Or if we do it properly, according to Chassidic philosophy, but if we do it properly, that it's not about me. There's nothing to, it's me. Do I want to put on tefillin in the morning? No, Hashem wants me to put on tefillin in the morning. So why am I putting on tefillin in the morning? Because now it became a part of me and I want to put on tefillin in the morning? That's one step. There's a step further, is that it's not about me whatsoever. It's all about Hashem. And this is the concept of bittul, of the self-nullification. And I am happy that I have the opportunity to nullify myself to do what Hashem wants. And Chassidic philosophy brings an example of a slave. A slave that is happy in his scenario. Okay, we're not talking about chas v'shalom, modern day slaves or something like that. A slave that wants to be a slave for the king, let's say. Offers himself up to be a slave for the king. That slave is happy to be in the place of being a slave. He trembles by being a slave because he has to follow orders. He has to do exactly what the master wants. So he trembles. But on the other hand, he's so happy that he has the opportunity to be a slave for so-and-so, for the king or whatever it is. That's the deeper aspect of serving Hashem with joy. Joy that I have the opportunity, not that I have the opportunity, joy that Hashem chose me and that I could even have that option that I could be of service to Hashem. And this brings us back to the idea of im kevanim and im kavadim. What did we say in the beginning? Earlier, we said that sometimes we refer to Hashem as our Father, im kevanim. And sometimes we refer to Hashem as im kavadim, if we're like servants of God. And that's the difference, the two sides of the coin that he brings here in the pasuk. That first of all, Hashem made a statue, the chayik, that we're children of Hashem. But we should really serve Hashem, not as a child serves a parent, which sometimes we do a better job than others when it comes to our kibud av v'em, our honor of our parents, right? It's the way we are. Sometimes we're better than others. But as a slave doesn't have a time that he could be better or not better. He's always in the service of his master. And to do that joyfully, to do that mitzvah, I need to do that mitzvah. Hashem wants me to do a mitzvah. I'm going to do that mitzvah and do it joyfully. It's not about me. It's about the mitzvah and it's about what Hashem wants. And that's it. And that is the idea of tempering your joy with a little bit of trembling. And that's why it says, Vigilu birada. You should be happy and joyful. Birada. But you should also tremble at that moment. Through the happiness, you should also tremble. That is that pasuk. It also reminds me, and it's because I actually learned this Mishnah on Friday with Philip. So it reminds me of, where is it over here? It's here. It reminds me of that famous Mishnah of Ein Aimdim Lispalal Elo Mitoich Kavod Rosh, that a person shouldn't start davening without bowing his head a little bit. The literal translation, it's a famous, if I remember correctly, it's chapter 8, Mishnah number 1 in Masechtas Brachas, in Tractate Brachas, that a person, before he starts davening, he should have a heavy head. That's the literal translation. But the Gemara goes in and discusses it. Then the Mishnah continues and says that the next level, going into davening with your head bent a little bit, that's the first level. The next level, it says, Chasidim Arishainim, the earlier pious ones, they would sit an hour before davening, preparing themselves for davening. That's the rest of the Mishnah. But this idea of Kavod Rosh, so the Gemara discusses it. And there's different opinions of what Kavod Rosh is. And one of the opinion is that you have to be bitter inside. And they bring a proof from Chana. When Chana davened, V'hi maras nafesh, that she was bitter inside because she couldn't have children. She was bitter and she prayed out to Hashem. And we should learn from Chana how to daven. And the Gemara discusses Chana, beautiful, beautiful, half a page of Gemara discussing every verse about Chana. A beautiful Gemara. When you have a chance, you should look at it. Beautiful Gemara. And that's one of the proofs of where we learn of Ein Aimdim Lispalal that you should daven a little bit bitter inside. We daven to Hashem, shouldn't be all jolly and happy and jumping around. No, we have our head bent in front of Hashem. That's the first opinion in the Gemara. That's from Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Yaisi Rebbe Chanina comes and he says, no, we learn it from another pasuk. If I remember correct, this is a pasuk in Tehillim, Vani b'reiv chazdecha v'yveisecha shtach v'leicha kodshecha b'yirosecha. That when I come to daven in front of you, when I come into your shul, talking about the sanctuary, it wasn't talking about a shul at the time, but what it means today, obviously, it means when you walk into shul. And when I walk into shul, I walk in with awe. I bend my head down. It's, like I'm not so high-tech when I walk into a shul. Relax. And that is the second explanation that David HaMelech recognized all the greatness that he was given from Hashem, and that he was humbled by it, and that's Vani b'reiv chazdecha. That's the second explanation. And then Rabbi Shua ben Levi comes and says that it says Hishtachvu Hashem behadras kodesh. They should bow down in front of Hashem with hadras kodesh, with reverence. That's how you should bow down to Hashem. And he says, "Loi behadras kodesh." Don't read it. Hadras kodesh becharodas kodesh, with trembling, with trembling. That's what he says, and that's how he continues. And then the Gemara ends off and says, "No," and kind of says, "We're ignoring not those things. That's not why kavod reish. That's not why we daven with our heads bowed." Ella Amar Rab Nachman and Rab Yitzchak says, "No, from a total different place, from our pasuk." Our pasuk, Ivdus Hashem be'yira v'gilu berada. Where do we know that when you daven, you should put your head down and you should be more somber when you daven? We know it from this pasuk, and that's what the Gemara discusses over there. This whole idea of kavod reish, of davening with reverence to Hashem. The Gemara ultimately concludes that it comes from our pasuk, from the pasuk that we have over here, pasuk number 11, that you serve Hashem with awe. Vigilu, and you still have to do it with joy, but bir'ada, with trembling. That's the idea over here. Interestingly enough, that over here, he mentions vigilu bir'ada, that you should be joyful with trembling, right? So there's the joy part, Ivdu as Hashem b'simcha, serve Hashem with joy, and then there's the rada, there's the trembling. And the Rebbe brings down in a sikha, you always have to start with joy. Never start your service of Hashem with the trembling. You should start your service of Hashem. It says the gilu first. First, start your service of Hashem with joy. Ivdus Hashem b'simcha. It's a much more important part of your service of Hashem is to do it with joy. And then to take it to the next level, yes, you should think about the awesomeness of Hashem, and you should have ra'ada, so to speak. You should have this idea of trembling. The pasuk number 12, Nashkuvar. You should yearn for purity. Pen yenaf, because you might get angry. V'soivdu derech, and you'll lose your way. As we mentioned last chapter about the ways, Hashem knows the way. You'll lose your way, you'll become lost. Ki yivar kemat apoy, and his anger can flare up at any moment. And ashrei, praised be the one. Kol chaysei boy, anybody who puts his full trust in the Eibishter, anybody who puts his full trust in Hashem. That is pasuk number 12. So pure heart. So a person should serve Hashem, that Hashem shouldn't get angry, and praise is the one who follows in this way. Okay, that's the end of chapter number 2. And I promised you last week that we're going to discuss about chapter 1 and 2 being one chapter or being 2 chapters. So the famous Gemara that says that if David HaMelech, how do we know if a psalm was very dear to King David? We know that if he started with the word Ashrei and he ended with the word Ashrei. So, and then they give an example of our kapitel. It ends with Ashrei. We just finished it. Ashrei kol chaysei bay. Where does it start with Ashrei? It starts with Ashrei in the beginning of the previous chapter. The previous chapter, chapter number 1, starts with Ashrei Hoish, right? Praised is the man. So we'll be finished in a few minutes. How we go? So Ashrei Hoish, praise be the man. So what's the story? Is it 1 chapter or is it 2 chapters? So ultimately, the Gemara it comes and says that at one point it was 1 chapter, And the rabbis later split it and put chapter 1 and 2 into two separate chapters. At one point, it was one long chapter that was 18 psukim long, 18 verses long, which is not that long for a kapitel Tehillim. And at one point, they split it up. The obvious question is why? Why was it split up? So the Maharsha comes and says, and this is something that we might talk about as we go along throughout the at least the first 19 chapters of Tehillim, will come up here and there, how the Maharsha says that the first 18 or 19 chapters of Tehillim are connected to the Shmona Esrei. What does Shmona Esrei mean? Shmona Esrei is that service that we do in Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, and it means 18, because originally it was 18 blessings. Shmona Esrei, 18 blessings. And then what happened? Shmona Esrei became 19. They added in a blessing into Shmona Esrei, V'lo malshinim alti sikva, for the slanderers. The Jewish people were having troubles with some slanderers, so they added in a blessing to fight against these slanderers. So it became from 18 to 19. We still call it Shmona Esrei, but if you count, there's 19 blessings. So the rabbi said, if the first 18 and the 18 chapters of Tehillim are connected with the Shmona Esrei, now it's 19 brachas. So they took the first chapter of Tehillim and split it into two, and now the first 19 blessings are connected to Shmona Esrei. If you look, the last, which we're going to get to in a few months, but the last verse in chapter 19 is the last thing you say in Shmona Esrei. You look at it, I can't remember now the words. Yil ratzein imrei fi, right? Yil ratzein imrei fi, v'hagin libi lefanecha, Hashem tzuri v'goyali. It's the last verse in chapter 19, and it is the last verse that you say before you take 3 steps, and you say Oisa Shalom in Shmona Esrei. So they're connected. So in order to have 19, so they took the first chapter and split it into 2. That's the way the Maharsha explains it. The Rebbe has a long discussion about this, and the Rebbe says ultimately, I'm going to give you the short version of it, but I think it's beautiful. King David lived in a very different time than we did. What does the first chapter that we learned last week talk about? The first chapter talks about the uniqueness of the Jewish people and their connection to Torah and mitzvahs. Ashrei Yoish, praised is the one who walks in the ways of God, learns Torah, does mitzvahs. Good. What's going to happen to such a person? Kol asher yasi yatzliach, the pasuk says. Last week we talked about whatever he's going to do, he's going to be successful. That's the first mizmar, the first kapitel, the first chapter of Tehillim. The second chapter of Tehillim talks about another scenario where kings and ministers start up with the Jewish people. These kings and ministers start up with the Jewish people. And what happens? We tell them, don't worry, Hashem will fight your war. What's going to happen over here? We're going to recognize that Hashem runs the world. This service, the type of way that the success is going to come from above. It's not going to be through our efforts below. It's going to come from above. It's going to come as an inspiration from above. Hashem will shower us with success. That's what chapter number 2. So when King David and his generation, both chapters worked hand in hand. All the Jewish people were serving Hashem. It was a good time. It was a Mashiach-dik time. So therefore, in the times of King David, it made sense that chapter 1 and chapter 2 were together. You have on the one hand, Ashrei Yoish, praises the one who serves Hashem, and whatever he's going to do is going to be successful. And when kings start up with you, don't worry, Hashem will take care. But that works in a Mashiach-dik time, in the times of King David. Now, we have the first chapter. It applies to us. Ashrei Yoish, praised is the one who walks in Hashem's ways and learns Torah and does mitzvahs. And what he'll do will be successful. But as a group, we still need Mashiach. And therefore, chapter 1 and 2 were separated. When the rabbis realized that chapter 1 it applies more, and chapter 2 will only apply, according to some, only applies in the time of Mashiach. It will only apply then. So then, we have to separate them. They have to be 2 separate kapitlas. The first kapitel and the second kapitel. The first chapter and the second chapter. In the times of King David, both chapters applied. In our times, chapter 1 applies. Chapter 2 is something that we look forward to for the times of Mashiach. Comes the Rebbe and he ties it in with the first Rashi of chapter number 2. Because the first Rashi in chapter number 2, Rashi first gives the drush. He first gives the homiletic explanation that says that this chapter is talking about when Mashiach comes. And then he says, oh, it could also be talking about King David. And that's the pshat, the simple way of learning this chapter. Comes the Rebbe and says, why did Rashi have to bring the first explanation first, the drush first? Because it makes more sense for the fact that they split the two prakim. And that's the way the Rebbe learns this idea of why they split chapter 1 from chapter 2. And with that, we finish chapter number 2. I'm looking forward to seeing you all for chapter number 3, God willing, next week.